you've ever heard the phrase, the end justifies the means. The end justifies the means. That means when you're going through something that isn't fair or it doesn't seem right, why is this happening? It shouldn't be that way. But then as it plays itself out, you go, oh, okay, I see what happened. Now I see it worked out. What it means is that the end of it justified the means that you had to go through to get there. And so, like for instance, when I worked at Eagle, at a place where the radio place where I met Anna, I was money hungry at the time. That's all that was on my mind was money. And after 5 years of getting no raise, finally, no cost of living raise or promotion, nothing for that matter, they finally decided to sweep the whole company. Everybody got raises in the entire company, except me. Now imagine what that does to your mind. First of all, you're worshiping the big dollar bill. Everybody got a raise but you. Everybody that day is all excited. Finally, they're not talking about how much money they make, but they're just excited. The company's doing better. We can all get raises, and everybody knew it was across the board that everybody got a raise, and everybody's celebrating, and they're like, yes, good company, and you're the only one that didn't get one. And you got to listen to this talk all day long. I was mad. I was steaming because money was my God. I didn't realize until later God was humbling me. He was pushing me down to get me away from that God, to get me to look at Him. And so finally, I gave up money and said, I don't need this God. I need the true God, the God of Israel. And now I follow Him. That's what made it easy for me to walk away from my 20-year radio career to do full-time ministry. Because if I still bowed to that other God, I wouldn't be doing this. Because I'm telling you, there's no money in ministry, okay? You're not going to get rich. I know you're thinking about some pastors that are. Okay, they don't make hardly any percentage of the real pastors that are out there. The real pastors are impoverished. The real pastors that I've met, the ones in Africa, they probably have one suit and one pair of shoes, and they wear those shoes out, traveling, walk in to get to all the churches that they've planted. Those are real pastors right there, I'm telling you. They don't have no limos, and they don't even have air conditioning. They meet under a cattle cover. And they have church in it, and they really want it. I really respect those guys. So at the time, though, when I didn't get the raise, I was upset, but now I understand where God was trying to get me to. It wasn't unfair. I was mad. This isn't right. There's something wrong about this, but now the end justifies the means. And so we're going to see a little bit of that play in here today about the end justifying the means. Let's get on into it. Oh, I'm out of breath. It's been a busy last 24 hours. Where is Travis and Debbie? Why in the world are they not here? Travis and Debbie got married. I hope they are having an absolutely fabulous time today. 1 Samuel 21:1. David and the holy bread. So David is on the run. He's trying to escape Saul. Now David came to Nob and to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, "Why are you alone? And no one is with you." So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business." And he said to me, "Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or what I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found." Okay, Ahimelech the priest, he's scared. David comes walking up. Stories are going around about David, like why are you here? Why'd you come to me? This kind of reminds me of when Samuel went to Bethlehem back in chapter 16. Samuel and Saul had a goings-on too. I mean, Saul seems to not be able to get along with anybody. You ever know those people? They just can't get along with nobody. The problem is that guy, not everybody else. Hey, friend, a quick little lesson here from 1 Samuel. If everybody has a problem with you, maybe it's you. Okay? So anyway, Samuel showed up in Bethlehem in chapter 16, and the people were scared of him, and they asked, do you come in peace? Like, what's going on? Is it us? Or what are you here for? And Samuel was having those issues with Saul. And so obviously word of mouth travels around fast that when Samuel showed up, the people thought maybe we're in trouble. It's kind of like, as pastor of this church, I ask a member, hey, you want to talk for a minute? The first thing they get that look on their face is, uh-oh, what did I do wrong? Nothing, I just want to talk to you. So he shows up, and Ahimelech is, okay, what'd I do? You can hear it. Why are you here? What's going on? And so David, though, he's pretty much world famous at this point because he had killed Goliath. If that's all David ever did was just kill Goliath, that right there alone makes you a legend, okay? But David had a lot of other battles for Israel, and he was winning them all for Israel's benefit. And so to see him show up all alone, well, he showed up. He says, why are you here alone? David, I think, had some guys that was with him. David just shows up here. It just kind of looks odd. And it's got poor Ahimelech wondering, what's the deal here? Now, one possible reason why, maybe a little speck of possibility, why Ahimelech was concerned about David showing up is because Ahimelech is a descendant of Eli. How many of you remember Eli? Y'all remember Eli further up in the book? Eli was the high priest. He had those two sons that abhorred the sacrifice of the Lord, and they were very abusive to people. They used their priest status to abuse and steal and hurt people. And Eli refused to do anything about their behavior. He was their dad. He should have said, now you two boys sit down and stop this, and I'm going to do something about it. But Eli didn't have the backbone to contend with it. And they paid for it. They all ended up paying for it. The Lord punished them. And also, when I'm thinking of Eli, I remember in 1 Samuel 1, Eli accused Hannah of being drunk while she prayed. Have you ever prayed, but you weren't saying anything, but your mouth moved? I caught myself doing that the other day. I was just, like that. He thought she was drunk. This woman's over here talking to nothing, And as a priest, you would think the guy would be able to identify that. And so that's what Hannah was doing. And so the Lord sent a prophet to tell Eli that his house would be cut off from the priesthood. Eli and his two sons, they were all messed up. His family, they were a messed up bunch of guys. They weren't doing anything proper. They weren't doing it right. The Lord said, we're going to cut you off from the priesthood. And that the Lord said, I'm going to raise up another one who's going to do according to what is in my own heart and mind. Now, Ahimelech is in the family of Eli. He's in that family. And it was prophesied, your family's going to be cut off from the priesthood. Now, here comes David. What do you think Ahimelech's thinking? Why are you here, man? What's going on? Is this my day? So, yeah, David shows up, and Ahimelech was afraid. I understand now. Knowing the background story involved here, you can certainly see why Ahimelech's heart rate probably shot up. David? It's kind of like me saying, hey, you, come, let's talk right now. What did I do? The way Ahimelech saw this, it's possible he thought maybe even David came to kill him. If this guy is winning battles, if this guy killed Goliath and he shows up on my doorstep, maybe he's here to kill me? Why are you here? But if this was not how Ahimelech saw it, let's say maybe Ahimelech was not seeing it this way. Let me throw in another possibility. Then he may have feared that the enemies of Israel would be right behind Israel's future king. You've got a king in place. You've got a king that's anointed to become king. That's going to stir up a lot of controversy. And enemies were going to be following David to try to wipe him out. I think Ahimelech understood this. And if David shows up, the enemies are going to show up to try to take him out. So was Ahimelech afraid for himself prophetically? I don't know. Was he afraid because of enemies trying to come after David would bring trouble there? That's a possibility too. Ahimelech has a lot of reasons to be scared. I'm just trying to address some of the possibilities why he may have been afraid of David's being there. But David was just trying to get away from King Saul. That's all David was up to. But why did David lie? Did you see he lied to Ahimelech? He lied to him. King Saul had not ordered David out on business. So why did David say that? Why did he lie? Now, this story, to people who are going to try to manipulate this story does not justify lying. That's what David chose to do. He has a sin nature just like the rest of us do. But some people speculate that David lied, I'm on the king's business, in order to protect Ahimelech from any charges of conspiracy if Saul were to later find out that he had helped David. He's asking help from Ahimelech to protect Ahimelech. He made something up that the king sent me out on a mission. Now, if Ahimelech did not know anything, if he was, I'm unaware of what David's up to, then the king could not punish him for it. I think that was David's logic on why he lied to him. But I think David still has not realized the fullness of Saul's unreasonable character, because Saul doesn't care if you know anything or not. He's killing everybody regardless. I think David maybe has not identified that yet. Saul, if you remember, he tried to kill his own son Jonathan just in the previous chapter, right after he tried to convince Jonathan that his reason for wanting to kill David off was to establish Jonathan's throne. You don't say, hey, Jonathan, I want to make sure your throne is okay. That's why I'm mad at David, and then try to kill the guy that you're trying to set up. Saul, you're making no sense. Have you ever not made sense before? People, we need to identify with Saul a little bit, because sometimes we do things that don't add up too, okay? But how could Saul try to kill his own son that he claimed he was trying to set up as king? It just doesn't make any sense. Now, David did not seem to understand yet. He didn't seem to understand yet that Saul would try to kill Ahimelech, whether Ahimelech helped David or not. It seems to be anybody that's associated with David, he wants to kill. He tried to kill Jonathan just for association. And one thing I want to shoot forward to, though, in the next chapter, Ahimelech is killed by Saul anyway. He does get killed. He gets slaughtered by Saul anyhow. And so at this point, though, David thinks that Saul's insanity is limited only to just him. That he's only out to get just David. Saul's out to get everybody. Now, David tried to find sanctuary with Samuel the priest back before when he ran off earlier. And so now he came to find sanctuary with Ahimelech the priest. And so being that David had been on the run without anything to eat, he's just asking Ahimelech to eat some bread. That's all he wants. He's on the run. He's hungry. Do you have anything on hand that I could have to eat? 1 Samuel 21:4. And the priest answered David and said, there is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women. Okay, this is where it gets, where we got to buckle down and observe. This verse alone gives us a lot of information. It doesn't seem like there's much there, but there's a lot of info here. Here's this holy bread that's in the care of a priest. This holy bread is what's called the bread of presence, or showbread. It's called the bread of presence, which was used as a food offering to the Lord, and it was placed on a table inside the tabernacle. And so just from this one verse alone, we now know where the tabernacle's at. The tabernacle is it. Where did he go? He went to Nob. So now we know this is the tabernacle. See how much info you can get out of a verse. You got to dig. You got to see what they're talking about. There's no common bread, but there is holy bread. Exodus 25:30. The Lord says, and you shall set the showbread on the table before me always. Okay, so we've got clues on where the tabernacle now is. The bread set on the table of the pure gold table before the Lord was called the bread of presence. And where was the bread of presence kept? It was kept in the tabernacle, the same place where the Ark of the Covenant was at. Some of y'all may remember going to the Tabernacle Experience with me some odd years ago, and you walk in to the most inner part, to the inner court, then you go deeper than that, then you go behind the veil where nobody was supposed to go, and they had a life-size ark in there. It was real dark, and nobody was supposed to be there in the real tabernacle. It was I was like, whoa, when I went in there. It was kind of a spooky, not spooky, but just the reverence, the sense of, I'm too sinful, but that's not the tabernacle anymore. We are the temple. So anyway, that's where the ark was kept. So the last known location that we have about where the tabernacle was located way back in 1 Samuel 7. That was many, many years ago in 1 Samuel 7. It was in Kirjath Jearim was the name of the place. And since that time, all those years back, there has been no mention of the tabernacle's location, where it had been, where it had traveled to, where it had journeyed, until now in 1 Samuel 21. All of a sudden now we know that it's in Nob. So now that we know that the tabernacle was in Nob, where David had come here in chapter 21, we have a lot of information just from that one statement. There's no common bread here, but we have holy bread, he said. Okay? So, David asked for something to eat. Ahimelech said there was no common bread, but only the bread of presence, the holy bread. And about that bread of presence, no one but the priests were allowed to eat it. That was the priest's bread. That's what they got to eat. And especially for some men that may have been with David, especially for men who probably had been messing around with women that would made them ceremonially unclean. They certainly could not have eaten of it. That's why Ahimelech said, let me find it, that's why he said there's no common bread, but there is holy bread if the young men have at least kept themselves from women. It's kind of like, you're not really supposed to have this bread because it's the holy bread. But gosh, your guys, have they been messing around? I mean, we shouldn't profane that. So it's kind of looking like the priest is saying, this really isn't for you. You really shouldn't be doing this. But let's see what David says in 1 Samuel 21 and 5. Then David answered the priest and said to him, truly, women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day. Okay, an interesting detail here is the fact that David is talking like he'd been around all these other men. We saw that David arrived in Nob all alone. Here's part of the argument that people see in the Bible, because based on the fact that Ahimelech said, why are you here all alone? I believe David had guys with him. I believe some men, remember Jonathan sent David away, and I think he had some guys that picked up and went with him. As a matter of fact, later Jesus spoke that David and those with him ate this bread. Okay, so I believe some guys, you got to look in the scriptures on who all saying what here. There are some people that have come along with him. But we know David lied about being sent out on a mission by King Saul. So was David lying about there being other men with him too? Because that's what the argument is. No, I think he was with some other people. But David assured Ahimelech that he and the others, anybody else who was with him, they were clean. He was saying, no, we're clean. We're set apart, holy from sexual immorality. He said that so that Ahimelech would allow him to eat some of that holy bread. He's saying, look, we're okay. It's like, I know we're not priests, but we have not been messing around out there, because that was Ahimelech's concern, that y'all been around women. Now, interestingly, though, David is not a Levite. Who knows what tribe David was from? Judah. What's significant about that? Because that's where the Messiah would come from. Now, the showbread, the bread of presence, was for the Levites, and David's not a Levite. So, technically, because David was from Judah and not a Levite, technically, by law, David was not supposed to eat this bread. He's not supposed to have it. Okay? So 1 Samuel 21 and 6. So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there. So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread which had been taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Okay, as it says here, bread was taken from before the Lord. In other words, they would bake fresh bread for the table of presence to put in the tabernacle, but the bread that David had been given was the old bread that had been taken away from the presence of the Lord. So every Sabbath or so, they would come and they would put fresh bread in there. The bread that had been there for the week, they took that away. That's the bread that the priest got to eat. So that's what David got. It was the bread that had been taken away. Let's read about this real quick in Leviticus 24:5. It says, "And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Every," what? Every Sabbath. How often is that? Once a week. You see how we're playing in the story now. "Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons." That's the Levites. "For Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him, from the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual statute." Okay, so the bread was replaced every Sabbath, which means every week. But the old bread was for Aaron and his sons. It's for the Levites that they were to eat that bread. Now, David, like I said, was not a Levite. He was from Judah. So the question arises now. Here comes the end. It's got to justify the means somewhere. Right now we're in the means. The means is that David can't have it. David, you're really not supposed to eat this bread. So the question I ask myself when I read this is that how could Ahimelech have given David this older showbread when by law David was not allowed to eat it? You see the problem? Okay. The most important matter at hand here is that God's chosen man is hungry and could die. That's the bigger priority. Guys, if you're starving to death, you need something to eat. You're hungry. Well, I've got this holy bread that nobody really should eat. Well, the bigger matter at hand is you need something to eat. That's the bigger priority. And so he gave him the bread. There was nothing in the law that allowed the bread, that said the bread could not be given to someone else if they were needing it, that they were in trouble. But Ahimelech knew that Ahimelech knew that this law, even the law around the bread and all this stuff about the bread, he knew the law was given by God to help life, not to hurt it. Everything the Lord does is to help life, not to hurt it, including the law. And so he knew that the law demanded that you should help the needy always takes a higher priority than ritual. That's the important part here. Helping the needy takes higher priority than ritual. Deuteronomy 15:7. Let me show you that. It says, "If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs." Whatever. Ahimelech, do you have bread? Well, it's showbread. You're not supposed to eat that. Well, the law says you're not supposed to eat that bread, David. Well, the law also says don't shut your hand. Open it wide and give to whatever he needs. See, this means giving to the poor person who is in need, it trumps the law of you can't eat that. That's what this means, is he should be giving it to him. And so Ahimelech determined that when ritual and starvation conflicted with each other, then giving the bread to David took upper importance. It was higher priority. I think I've pretty well made that point. I don't think I need to explain it any further. If you were starving to death, you'd probably want the bread too. And wouldn't it not be right for me to give it to you if you needed to have it? Well, that's not for you. That's for, we need to keep that bread. We're going to do that for communion later today. I have service later, and if I don't have any communion bread, then nobody gets to take communion. Well, guess what? The people coming to church ain't starving to death. If I had communion bread and a starving man begged me for bread, I would give him the communion bread. That's kind of what's going on here. The letter of the law, how it's written, the do and the don't, and you got to do this and don't do that. There's purpose to it, but that's not the upper importance. The letter of the law is not, it doesn't mean the letter of the law is unimportant, but it can never be followed at the expense of the spirit of the law. There's two things. There's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The letter of the law, do this, don't do that. Do it this way, don't do it that way. But the spirit of the law says, this is to further life. This is to further the kingdom service of God. We have to learn how to divide the two apart and see them for what they are. Some people, they're the letter of the law. The letter of the law. We're not going to do this because the letter of the law. And they're so stuck on this letter of the law that they forget the spirit of the law. The Pharisees in Jesus' day, they were always trying to get him. And they were always trying to throw law at him. Oh, we got you on this. But they forgot the spirit of the law. Jesus was going around telling people how to be saved. But the Pharisees were, no, the letter of the law. Jesus, you can't do this. They forgot the spirit of the law, which says we're going to further life. We got to get focused on furthering. Well, I got to get up and I got to go to church in the morning. Here I am. I am here at church. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Let's listen to the pastor. Good job, pastor. You did a good sermon. And go home and you forget the spirit of what I'm trying to tell you. Don't get caught up in the letter that you forget the spirit of it. The spirit is to further life, to tell people the gospel, to save lives, to feed the hungry, to help the poor. It's not to come in, check off your box for church. Don't get ritualistic to where you forget why you're doing it. Okay. Understand the purpose of what the law is trying to do, which is to preserve life. Now, David, I think David being given this showbread that wasn't really for him was God's provision for David's survival. David would probably died out there in the middle of nowhere. I think God provided him that showbread, and I think that was something we can't really argue about. Now, I want you to hang on to this story of David eating the showbread here because it's going to hold significance here shortly, okay? Now that we got the letter of the law, spirit of the law understood, let's move on. 1 Samuel 21:7. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. So the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, take it. For there is no other except that one here. And David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. Wow. This is like one of those moments where it's like David got reunited with Goliath's sword. It's like, when you're watching like a Lord of the Rings movie and they go a long time and here's this legendary sword and now the king takes it and like dun dun dun, the music comes up. It's like an awesome moment. I'm feeling that here with David. It's like, this is the sword I chopped Goliath's head off with, and here we are again, let's go. Just an awesome moment. But it sounds cool, but how did that sword get in the tabernacle? What's it doing here? What are you thinking of swords being in tabernacles for? Did the priests carry swords? I don't think so. I think they carried tools for butchering the animals with. They were good at that because they had to butcher the animals up for the sacrifice work. But what is the sword of Goliath doing in the tabernacle? That's the first thought I had. The last time we heard of this sword, like I said, was when David cut Goliath's head off with it. Priests don't carry swords, but it's likely, I think, that David dedicated that sword to the tabernacle as a symbol of God's protection when Israel needed it. It's like, tabernacle guys, here, this is the sword that defeated the God mocker Goliath. I want to dedicate it. And so they took it and they wrapped it up in an ephod as a reminder of what happened on that day when that giant rivaled and mocked the God of Israel. So it's awesome, though, how that in David's time of need, running from Saul, that the priest gave it back to him. So again, not just the showbread was provision, but now David's got a sword. That same sword that that was dedicated to remind everybody that God protects Israel is now back in David's hands. Do you think if you were David holding that sword that you would not be reminded what the Lord did that day, and it would embolden you with better courage and strength to do what you need to do? David is running from Saul. I got to get away from Saul. And here's the sword. You remember when you killed that giant? Come on, David. Let's stand up straight. Let's get it done. That's kind of how I'd take it. So, wow, what a moment here. The priest gave it back. And as we read in verse 7, one of Saul's guys named Doeg, if I'm saying it right, happened to be in Nob that day. So you can see how the Lord provided for David's needs before David even knew he needed it. David needs a sword. Saul's got a spy in town. The Lord gave it before he even knew he needed to have it. Did you know, friends, that the Lord provides for your needs often before you even know that you need it? We know we need to pray for things we need, but there's times things will come at you. The Lord's given it to you before you are even aware. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord. Okay. 1 Samuel 22:9. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. So now you can see how timely it was, or let me say not just timely, but ahead of time, that the Lord provided for David by giving him that sword and the bread. Doeg spotted David in Nob. And so he reported it to Saul that David was there. So the chase is still on. David got away, but now it's been reported. 1 Samuel 21:10. Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? People in Achish's land over here in Gath are starting to say, Isn't that David guy? Now, let's dress this up real quick. David's situation just got really desperate. Saul's back after me again. He darted off. It's like you can see the desperation going on. But let me ask you, does Gath ring a bell? He went to Gath. Does Gath remind you of anybody? Let's look at 1 Samuel 17. I want to remind you of Goliath. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath. He just ran to Goliath's hometown with Goliath's sword. Uh-oh. He takes the very sword that he used to chop Goliath's head off, and he goes, fleeing for his life again. He threw all caution to the wind by running to Gath, the hometown of Goliath, the dead Philistine champion Goliath that he killed. Now, you remember a few chapters back, the Philistines were refusing to let the Israelites work with metal because they wanted to prevent them from weaponizing themselves. Remember, if they wanted any metal work done, they had to contract it to the Philistines. They had to pay them. The Philistines would not let the Israelites work with metal. As a matter of fact, no Israelite had any swords except for Saul and Jonathan. They were the only ones that had a sword on them. And so David, he carried this sword. Here's an Israelite guy carrying a sword into Gath that would have had Philistine craftsmanship to it, not to mention being the sword of their great champion Goliath. That must have been a very easily recognizable sword. And here he is. I'm trying to get away from Saul, and I'm carrying this sword into Gath. What do you think the people's going to do? I think they're going to attack him. That's what would probably happen. So he's walking through there with this sword. He may as well be shouting, "Hello, David the Israelite's here." And the people recognized him. They knew it was him. Is this not David, the king of the land? It's amazing how Saul refused to recognize David as king, but the Philistines did. 1 Samuel 21:12. Now David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath, so he changed his behavior before them. He pretended madness in their hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva fall down on his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see the man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" Okay, David did a weird but very smart thing here. He's doing all this weird stuff, and what's going on? You can tell from the Achish's reaction what this means. David was spared from being attacked by the Philistines. How did he exactly accomplish this? By pretending to be crazy. Back then, the people regarded insanity as that you were extremely wickedly evil. If you were insane and nutty, crazy, they felt like you had this tremendous amount of wickedness curse on you. And they also perceived that insane people would show up as a warning sent by their false gods that something terrible was about to happen to them. And so what David did was he took advantage of Philistine thinking. They pictured David as being invincible since he slayed Goliath. They know, isn't that the guy that slayed Goliath? He killed our biggest, mightiest guy. But if our gods could mess him up, something really bad must be coming to us. You see what he did? David scared them. He put the fear on them using their own false religion to do it. And so they were now so scared of him. They thought their false gods were about to bring forth this massive curse. They were too scared to let David even be around them. They thought their gods were about to put a curse. And so King Achish saw David as being the most severe warning he had ever seen, that he didn't even want David anywhere near his house. He's insane. Get him out of here or else we're all going to die by the gods. Smooth move, David. Well done. That was a good trick. David's like, oh gosh, where am I at? Oh shoot, I'm in Gath. I got Goliath's sword. I better look like a warning. I'm going to go nuts. Okay? And that's what he did. And it worked. It worked. The Lord was continuing to protect David, and he escaped from Gath. And you know, sometimes the Lord will bless you and protect you in very weird and unexpected ways. Now, if you ever see me doing that, I don't know. Sometimes I want to. But let's go back to the bread of presence real quick. I want to close it up. This Old Testament showbread placed on the table in the tabernacle provides us a wonderful picture of Jesus Christ. John 6:35. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." Now, Jesus is holy before God. Where was the bread placed? It was placed before God. Jesus is holy before God. He provides us true sustenance. And just like how the bread of presence was kept continually on the table, Jesus is always present. Jesus is always there. They kept that bread on the table. It's always there. We should at least be able to understand anytime you need to call on the name of the Lord, He's there. And He's your true sustenance. He will give you life. Jesus is always present. Now, when David asked the priest Ahimelech for food, he gave David the bread of the presence because there was nothing else to give him. That's it. There's no other bread but this. That's the only bread we got. Jesus, the bread of life, He is it. He's the only way to eternal life because there is no other way available. John 14:6. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. There is no other bread. Oh, I'll feed off something else. I'll feed off my 401k. I'll feed off my great millions that I've accumulated for myself. No, that's not going to work. That is not true sustenance. Jesus is the bread of what? Did He say the bread of finances? No, He said the bread of life. Friend, if you want life eternal, money's not going to do it. You need the bread of life. Money is not life. It's just finances. It's here one minute and gone the next. One bad investment, it's gone. But Jesus is always present. Now, if you look at the legalities here, then according to God's law, we think about David. He really shouldn't eat that bread. He really shouldn't have been given that bread. David, you really shouldn't be qualified to be able to get that bread. Technically, by the law, you shouldn't have that. Then according to God's law, we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so there are those who would say that you and I are legally restricted from partaking of the bread of life. We blew it. We're not qualified. We're not in the right lane. We messed up, we sinned, and we fell off and blew all the legalities. We should not be eating this bread, technically, by law, because we messed up. We should not be qualified to be saved. And in one sense, that's true. We're not qualified. And so there enters the argument. How can we be saved if the law says we messed up? How can we get this bread if the law says you blew it? I want to take you to the New Testament where some people tried to bring up an argument to Jesus, and let's look at how He handled it, okay? Matthew 12:1. It says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. Very important that you know which day that is, because they had all these laws. You can't work, you can't do this, can't do that. And His disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to Him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. But He said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even on the Sabbath. Okay, a lot in there. Now, some of it we get because we went through the story, but some of it, what's happening? During this time, in Jesus' time, the Pharisees were chasing Jesus around, looking for ways to take Him down. Just like Saul was chasing David around, trying to take him down. Kind of the same thing. We're going to try to get him at any chance we can. And the Pharisees, they had taken the law of Moses, but they had added layer upon layer upon layer of man-made law, baloney, on top of layer after layer. And they had new laws. You can't do this. You can't do that. They were working in the letter of the law. They forgot the spirit of the law to further life, to help man, not to strike man down and accuse and condemn him for everything he did. So they're saying you can't do this, can't do that. And they stacked their man-made laws on it so high that any time they wanted to accuse anyone of anything, they had a ready-made law on hand to do it. All I got to do is watch you for a day, and probably within an hour, I've got some little law we cranked up that I can get you with and take you out that puts you away and keeps my stature powerful. That's what it was all about. They were manipulating letter of the law. They forgot the spirit of the law. And so when they saw Jesus and the disciples eating from grain fields on the Sabbath, by the way, there is permission in the law that says that you can take some heads from the corners and stuff and what all. That's okay. As a matter of fact, the field owners were intended that the corners and the edges of their fields were for that, okay? If you went into the field with a sickle and started harvesting mass amounts, now that becomes work. That's financial gain. That's not survival anymore. Now you're taking mass quantities down to go sell it and make money off of it. But a guy just picking a head to eat the grains, that's just trying to live. That's the difference in letter of the law and spirit of the law. The letter of the law says no going in and mass threshing out to try to gain for yourself off somebody else's field. But the spirit of the law says man needs to survive. It's okay to pick some heads. But the Pharisees, they had all them layers, and you're picking heads on a Sabbath. That's work to us. And that's why they're going after Jesus here. They considered grain picking to be work. The law of Moses talked about no work on the Sabbath, but they morphed the action of picking heads of grain to be work. What the law said you can't do is you can't work for the financial gain, as in a business. You're supposed to rest. You're supposed to take a break. But there's nothing wrong with picking the heads for the mere survival, the furtherance of life. Okay. So this was the perfect moment for Jesus to bring up David. This is just nothing better. Who had done something unlawful when he ate the showbread, and the Pharisees held David with such high esteem. David could do no wrong. He was our King David. So Jesus uses the story of something David did. Because they're going to accuse Jesus, but they are not going to try to accuse David. Slick. So they held David with such high esteem that David could never be wrong. Jesus asked the Pharisees, don't you remember reading about David eating the showbread that only the priest could eat? Jesus was basically indicating that if David was not guilty for eating that bread, then neither was he and the disciples for picking grain to eat during the Sabbath. See, the Pharisees gave David a free pass. David gets out of jail free. We can't hold him guilty. Because they understood it was necessary for his survival, but they refused to give Jesus and his disciples the same pass. They didn't give them the same allowance that they're just eating to survive. So look at how Jesus responded to them when they're trying to accuse him for anything they could find. Jesus said that what David did and what we did by picking the grain to eat, it was unlawful. Look at verse 4. Look at what he said. He said how David ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat. Jesus actually stated that David eating that bread was not lawful. Jesus said that. So yeah, when you just look at the story, David, you're not supposed to eat that bread. It's unlawful. Well, it wasn't. It was not lawful. He admitted that. Jesus said it. But then he took it past just David by saying in verse 5, he said the priests profane the Sabbath and yet are blameless. What that means is the priests are working on the Sabbath. You come to the temple to do your little Sabbath things, and the priests are in there working. It's like people that tell me that the Sabbath day you're supposed to do nothing, and I come in on my Sabbath day to church and I do absolutely no work at all. You think setting all this up ain't work? Okay, I see you guys come in here and you tear this stuff down and put the speakers up and the screen, and then we take it all down and we take it over to the storage facility and put it away. Guys, that's work. I hurt my back on these things. But the guy that comes in, I'm here for the Sabbath. You're not supposed to work. And they said, wait a minute. We're doing this for your benefit. It takes work. So Jesus said the priests are working in the temple on the Sabbath, profaning it. He's basically saying, guys, the priests are in there working. According to you, they're profaning it. You want to call us to say, I'm profaning it for picking heads? What do you think the priests are doing in there in the temple every Sabbath for you? According to you, they're profaning it. Somebody might as well look at me and go, well, Ray, you can't set this gear up. You're profaning the Sabbath. Well, you want a church service or not? It's as if Jesus said, you want to accuse us of breaking the law? Then how about what David did? And if the priests work in the temple during the Sabbath, then how is it that they are considered innocent? when by you, they're profaning it. I'm sure the Pharisees really had to think about this one. If I was a Pharisee there, I'd be going, wait a minute. He does have something here, doesn't he? They knew good and well that they never accused David or the priests of being guilty for what they had done. Now, Jesus was forcing them to consider, if David and the priests were innocent, then how could they accuse them for eating grain? Jesus and the disciples, they were not out with a sickle taking down mass amounts of grain. It says they were picking a few heads. That is not work. That is not financial gain work. They were not working in a way that actually really violated the law. And so the principle that Jesus was drawing to their attention to concerning the law is that in cases of necessity, such as David needing the bread to eat for survival, in cases of necessity, the priests that were doing the work of the Lord in the tabernacle, because that is a necessity. Those of us that do this work on Sunday to set all this stuff up, it is a necessity so that we can further the kingdom work of God. Then acts of mercy are preferred to ritual services. The ritual services that we do, setting up, the ritual work that we do, getting things up, take second level to the superior upper priority of why we're here doing it. To propagate and further your life and to further the kingdom work of God. That is the upper priority. And so in verse 7, Jesus said, but if you had known what this means, and he quoted a verse, he says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, then you would have not have condemned the guiltless. Jesus was quoting Hosea 6:6, which says, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. You know how the people always did their offerings? Oh, we got to go do our offerings. We got to go do the sacrifices. And if you get really, really religious, you think you're appeasing God by doing the sacrifices. You know what God said is better? Mercy. Also, obedience is better than sacrifice. We learned that through Saul. It's better to do that than the sacrifice that's required to cover it up. And so the truth is, the Sabbath law did not forbid work absolutely, but it did forbid doing labor for worldly gain. And so activities that were done in the service of the Lord are not only allowed, they are commanded. Somebody wants to argue Sabbath with you. Oh, you shouldn't work. You shouldn't. Okay, ask them what they do on their Sabbath. Do they go to church? You think that pastor's not in there working? What about him? Is he profaning the Sabbath? Why do you hold him innocent, but you hold me guilty? That's what Jesus was getting at. It's commanded. Just as the priests who did work in this temple on the Sabbath, they were totally within the law. Likewise, so were Jesus' disciples as they served the Lord of the Sabbath, whose holiness was greater than that of the temple. Guys, the end justifies the means. When you're going through something, I don't understand it, this isn't fair, this is wrong, this isn't right, but what does the end result prove out? The end result proved out that Jesus went to the cross to die for our sins, and that end justified the means. Also, what David, he did something that was seemingly wrong when he ate the showbread, but the result was that it furthered the Lord's kingdom work. Now, Jesus was just undoing the legalism processes that the Pharisees had. He was attacking their legalism mindset of this. No matter what you do, eventually at some point, you're always going to end up guilty. When it comes to the law, no matter what you do, you never will be able to do it right. For those that get down on yourself, I never do anything right. Well, you know what? You don't. And same with me. I don't do anything right either. Well, how can I do anything right at all? Because I have Jesus Christ. And that's why it's so good to read from Romans 8, verse 3. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin. He condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Friends, you never could do it right. You never were. You were never going to be good enough. Thank God He sent His Son to take care of that whole mess for me and you. Don't get hung up on the letter of the law. The Spirit of the law is the priority. Further the kingdom. You know, it was wrong. If you want to talk about what's wrong, it was dead wrong for Jesus Christ to die, to be the one to die for my sins. That was wrong. Because Jesus didn't do anything wrong. But in doing so, by Jesus dying on the cross, the end justifies the means, because now I am granted eternal life. You are not worthless. You are priceless. Messiah Jesus died on the cross to redeem you.
You'll be set for life.